Good evening, guys. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I welcome you to the fourth part of a four-part webinar, which is called as Creation versus Collapse, curated by Helen, who is here with us right now, in association with Kala Chaupal Trust. And the fourth webinar is titled as Art as a Sanctuary, Art as Action. And as part of this webinar today, we are introducing a curatorial project conceptualized by me along with the Kala Chaupal Trust. It's called A Tale of Monsoons. And I will explain what A Tale of Monsoons is to all of you. Before that, I would also like to introduce the panelists who have joined us today. And they are Samuel Berthe, Nandita Kumar, and Tanya Kovacs. I will have to kind of flip because I'm also like, maybe I'll have to kind of also let the people in. So I'll pause in between. Yeah, so we have the three panelists with us today, and Tanya and Nandita, I'll tell you that both of them are artists and they're also connected with this project as participating artists. And Samuel is a friend, but also a very important historian who is, I would call him as a mentor scholar, but to this project. And Samuel's insights on maritime trade routes, maritime history, and the boats which were used to undertake voyage at that particular time in history, and also the history of boats itself is very useful for this project. And Samuel's insights and his kind of inputs have been very crucial for my own understanding. And that's why Samuel also is here today, and we will also hear from him more about this particular history. I'll briefly introduce you three. Many of the people who are participants and audience who have joined today may not be able to. May not be familiar with the participants. Nandita Kumar is a new media artist who works at the intersection of science, art, science, technology, and community to create interactive installations. She explores the elemental process through which human beings construct meaning from their experiences by creating sensory narratives through the usage of sound, video, animation, and performance, smartphone apps, customized motherboards, microwave sensors. Nandita has shown in Pompidou, ZKM, Chiasma, KNMA, LACMA, Red Cat, ICEA, Unipom, Film Archive, New York, NTAA, Red Cat. Ghar Pe, at Home, 2011-2012, a community art project she curated, has been documented online by Asian Art Archive, Hong Kong. She has also been a speaker at TEDx and MCA, Sydney. Thank you, Nandita. Welcome to this panel. Dr. Samuel Berthe, currently serving as Director, Alliance Francaise Institute, Hyderabad. Samuel has a PhD in history on Indo-French cultural relations from 1870 to 1962. He did his postdoctoral research with the CSH on the new states in India, and particularly on Chhattisgarh. He was research coordinator for two European higher education projects on South Asia, Europe, maritime history. After 5 years in Chittagong, he dedicated his work to the shipbuilding and circulation in northern Bay of Bengal, highlighting a different approach of the Silk Road and examining the issue of borders, local geographies, and the contextualized relation to the environment. He also teaches the history of the Indian Ocean. Thank you, Samuel, for joining. Welcome to this panel.
Thank you, Prem.
Tanya Kovacs, born in London in 1966, she studied at Newcastle Polytechnic before completing her master's at the Royal College of Art, London in 1990. Kovacs' work has focused on drawing and mapping landscapes, as well as describing or using geological processes in the making of both sculpture and drawings. Much of Kovacs' research has focused on geology, to further understand how landscapes are formed, exclusive of humanity's effects upon them. Kovacs became interested in investigating rock formations worldwide that follow simple mathematical formula. She has also commenced an investigative body of work mapping imaginary and existing islands with the intention of eventually creating her own floating atlas. Wow. Through her research, Kovacs has developed an interest in geological forces and how they affect landscape and the built environment. Seismographs and seismograms, visual records of the Earth's movement, have become central to Kovacs' practice. Her work titled Tree, was selected from 9 other shortlisted artists in the Darwin's Company project at the Natural History Museum and was commissioned to celebrate Darwin's bicentenary in 2009. Just now, Nandita to start presenting her talk and talk about her project and what she would like to share.
Is it good to go now?
Yes. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for coming and sort of being active participants in this talk, which has been organized by Kala Chaupal. So I'll be starting that a cohesive existence between nature and technology would be the design challenge for the century. And therefore, I carry forth this vision of a more informed citizen of our current environment through art, interactivity, sound, and storytelling. With my practice, I have attempted to draw attention to current problems, inventions, new scientific concepts, the complexity and the impact of technology. And I hope that in the process, I make individuals, viewers aware about the human interdependence and deep interconnectedness to our natural environment. Now, over the past few years, as my projects have become more and more heavily research-based, I've become interested in the data, its representation, how one communicates that to the larger audience. And as the internet continues to blur the boundaries between communities, the world as we are seeing has become increasingly data-driven. Information overload, lack of meaning, complexity, fake news, all of this has actually made people feel anxious and powerless. So I constantly find myself asking questions. How do I make this data experience, which I present within the artwork, more intuitive and creative for the viewer, so that they can build new neural networks and draw insights from the data presented, especially for the users who are neither technically nor informationally inclined. So I've been trying to achieve this through experimenting with building art installations by combining self-guiding tech that produce frequencies and sounds, interactive videos, apps, drawing machines, etc. Alongside, their imageries of the natural world. And each one is sort of tugging and trying to draw harmony with one another. Now, the aim of these interactive installations is to create very immediate experiences rich of implicit meaning. The idea is to guide the viewer's conceptualization towards a connected ecosystem. So I find myself working within the spectrum of art, science, ecology, sustainability, technology, alongside community engagement. And this has become the basic framework of my practice. These explorations form a body of work exploring sustainability concepts which come under an umbrella of the 5 elements: air, water, earth, fire, and ether. And these elements are further expanded in their meaning through the lens of biomimicry, future foods, urban design, impact of technology, data transparency, to name a few. Given the context of my talk, I will be talking about the element water that I've been working on for the last 3 years with 3 different research-driven projects. Though I will be only talking about 2 because of the given time restraint. Osmoscope, which explores a graphical notation scope where data is related to water, has been arranged to form a sound scope. This data-driven artistic experiment probes through data, sound, explores several aspects of water through its nature, scarcity, politics, and interdependency. And simultaneously, it tries to explore methods of engaging audience with complex scientific data and issues of environmental health, and how deeply our human body is intertwined in all of this. The project wants to experiment further by exploring creative methods of interaction through a multi-sensory engagement. Therefore, it is divided into an installation, mural, book, and it is all connected through an app. The idea is to engage all the different senses, because each sense holds a proprietary memory location within the brain. And it creates, when you engage with this installation, it creates stronger memories because all the senses are engaged and it creates a collaborative effect. And therefore, it enhances the learning experience. The intention is to build a tangible user interface which will form an app, incorporating visuals and sounds. And I'm hoping that it would lead the viewer to inspire insights into the data and perhaps have an enhanced associative thinking and build patterns in the process. Now, for this project, we researched almost a year before I could actually get into designing the scope. The water data that was collected during this period was specifically from the internet, like government sites, NGOs, hacked research papers of scientists, found images of data over the internet. Now, each data set in the score is related to a case study, which is further expanded to a story. And so develops the story of water, which traces this deep interrelationship and complexity of water with its natural environment. And simultaneously traces the exponential impact of our anthropogenic activities on water through the perspective of biology, chemistry, design, and technology. The narrative of the score or the book starts from space, and this is because water is alien and it is much older than Earth. And it goes through the entire trajectory of atmosphere till it reaches the ocean. Water is like this giant motorway, and it travels through the landscape of the planet, the bodyscape, the materialscape, and the techscape. The starting data set, which you see in the score, is of water signature, which is the human attempt to seek life in space. It also explores how water plays a very important role in the incubation of life, to the shaping of the DNA to retain the code, and also attempts to understand the structure of water that leads it to become the universal solvent. Or more interestingly, how rain is the making of a tremendously ancient co-evolutionary relationship between the rainforest and their biocommunity. Now, what you'll notice is that it's really tightly interconnected, this relationship with bacteria, fungi, pollen, and dust, which not only makes the rain, but they also make the cloud, which keeps the planet cool. Clear-cutting forests or killing planktons in the ocean is also clear-cutting the sky. And this further goes on to explore the impact of population through the economic structures that we've built, and because of which the habits we've built. Industrialization as one of the core outputs. And one of the examples of industrialized agriculture is Aral Sea, where industrialized farming has dried this inland sea, which has led to desertification. And this desertification has led to winds that carry back toxic pesticides back to the cities around the sea. And this becomes a comparative to what is actually happening in Maharashtra, or the beginning of it. And I'm drawing similarities because both of them are cotton growing belts. These are just some of the examples of the found data that has been then converted into images using processing code in collaboration with a creative coder named Abhinay Kobrazi. And the image that's were created with the data become the basic form on which the visuals for the score were created, which is the base for the app also. So how does one interact with the app? The viewer in the app will be able to interact and build their own sound compositions while reading about the data. Now, there are 7 chapters in the app book that have 55 case studies attached to them with sound patterns connected. So, for example, when you press one of the 7 icons, you can scroll to that section of the data and a baseline sound appears, which is representative of that chapter. The viewer navigates through the score by triggering data by interacting with the visuals, and each visual is actually a data set, and his interactions imprint in layers, like we are constantly imprinting on water with our actions. And I'm hoping and I plan that this app can be open source and accessible. So the idea is that the score is not just limited to the people who have access to the installation, but wherever I'm able to stick and print the score, whether it is in the form of a mural or graffiti, and whoever comes across this work can take it with them in the form of the app, keep reading it and building the sounds, discovering stories of the case studies connected to water, and find their own deep relationship to it. Thus, with this work, I think conceptually I've been actually the closest to a science, art, and tech engagement with the community that I have been seeking. Now, I'll shift on to the second work, which also is a work in progress, and it's inspired by something called phytoremediation. And this refers to technologies that use living plants and their associated microorganisms, which are mostly around the roots, to help clean up the soil, water, and air by removing or rendering toxic contaminants harmless. Now, the plants chosen for this project can specifically grow in water bodies and wetlands in the tropics and semi-tropics and sometimes in the temperate zone, where most of the underdeveloped economies are found. This has been the main criteria for the research. Another reason why I have invested my energy into consolidating this research is because it is a very cost-effective plant-based approach that takes advantage of the ability of the plants to clear out toxins from water. And I hope that future ecologies in low-income economies can use this assimilated research to adopt these plants in their local spaces and before it re-enters the water system. Now, the that I'm imagining will be a biosphere in a glass tube that contains these 40 plants, where each plant is presented by one main pollutant, though every plant can actually remediate multiple metals and chemicals. The pollutants are divided into 5 categories, which are agricultural, industrial, heavy metal, sewage, and hydrocarbons. So, how does the viewer engage and learn with this art installation? The viewer can pick up these test tubes which have been placed on the table, and each test tube has a barcode which can be read like you read in the supermarket. And every time a barcode is activated, it activates a sound. And layers of sound can be put on one on top of the other to create an immersive sound experience. So, how is the sound created? The enthalpy of each chemical bond has been calculated and converted to an audible frequency range. And what exactly is enthalpy? It is when atoms combine to form a compound or when a compound breaks down. This results actually in heat to be released. And this particular change in energy was mathematically converted to an audible frequency range. Simultaneously, when the viewer activates the barcode for the sound, the plant information in the form of a digital book will also appear on a monitor, which is placed on the side, which the viewer would be able to read. So, and this book contains information like what environmental conditions the plant can grow, which toxins a particular plant can remediate, what are the food and nutritional benefits of each plant apart from its phytoremediation capabilities. Now, this idea is relatively quite new and has appeared in literature in the last 20 years. Many of the metals that are actually hyper-accumulated are also essential nutrients for humans. Therefore, another symbiotic relationship has been proposed because you can actually see that food fortification and phytoremediation are two sides of the same coin. Ultimately, humans can absorb these remediated toxins which have been created by their own polluting technologies. Through an interactive sound installation and a book, the aim is to create an immersive way for individuals to discover what could contain in a drop of water. How deeply interconnected chemistry and biology of our environment is. And when you have a more well-informed participant, viewer, it opens up windows where they could see how they could sustainably and symbiotically live within the resources which has already been provided by the planet. So,
Yeah, but thank you, Nandita. That was fabulous. Thanks a lot for the wonderful presentation. And I have few questions for you. I'll come. We'll ask that later. Now I invite Samuel. Please, Samuel, please come and start with your presentation.
Here we go. To an artist who just passed away on 25th of May, and whose last work was actually dedicated to the monsoon. The picture you can see on the right, he's one of his many photos. Actually, I should talk not only about him, but about them, Roland and Sabrina Michaud. Roland and Sabrina have been exploring the monsoon countries, at least the one we traditionally associate with the monsoon, for the last 60 years, starting their journey with East Africa and Ethiopia, and then exploring whole of Asia. You know them at least for that picture on the right, which is the man with the rose from Afghanistan. And there've been very little movies made on them, but a movie of Roland's last visit to India was being shot, and it's titled The Seventh Monsoon of Roland Michaud. It's in French, but maybe we could aim at subtitling it. And I just wanted to pay a tribute to Roland, who was a close friend, and I had the opportunity to actually travel with him, chasing the monsoon from Bangladesh to Meghalaya on one of his journey. Now I'm going not to talk too much about boats and ships, though it's a fascinating topic, but I'll come to that at the end, but it would require a fairly longish presentation. I just wanted to introduce how the understanding or the actually inclusion of the sea has totally changed our understanding of history, brought a new set of perspectives, of questions, and I will end up also highlighting what are the remaining lacunas. Whenever you read a book on the Indian Ocean, you invariably comes across that reference that we can talk about almost an iconic set of books by Fernand Braudel titled La Méditerranée, the Mediterranean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea and the Mediterranean world during Philip II. That book published in 1949, which went through many different revisions and translation in English from 1962 and 1973, was the first one to really put the sea at the center. And that was a real, almost a kind of a revolution for historians for many reasons, which we are going now to see. It was used And actually, the famous Indian historian Kiran Chaudhary was asked to write a Mediterranean Sea, a kind of similar studies based on the Indian Ocean, which were published in 1985 and 1990. Trade and civilization in the Indian Ocean, an economic history from the rise of Islam to 1750, and then Asia before Europe. And as soon as this second volume is being published, we can see that there is, thanks to the study of maritime history, which put the sea and the Indian Ocean at the center, uh, a breakaway from the European lenses on the world history. And that is the major change that putting the sea at the center of historical studies have triggered. I'm not going through the different materials on which this history is based, but there is, of course, a very important set of archives which are known as the Genisa. They are the merchant letters, and the most important set of them have been found in Cairo. They were actually letters which were discarded, which have been actually uh, um, dumped but not destroyed because they had the name of God written on it. And of course, it would be a blasphemy to destroy them. And thanks to that, they've been preserved, at least in the dry countries such as Egypt, over centuries. And most of them were letters by merchants, most of them written in Arabic script, though the biggest set is by Jew merchants, so it's actually Hebraic written in Arabic. And they are, well, just letters of merchants across the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean, exchanging information, news about shippings, and we even have some letters of different cases. And it opened up uh, a total new set of perspectives and different notions from the usual imperial and national histories, where we could where notions such as the transnational, the diaspora, circulations, connection took center stage, with a different set of actors, the Mopla, Mapila, the Adrami, merchants communities, the Lascars, which were there in different traveling accounts and different archival material, but now they really took again center stage as the movers, Awala, Nakhuda, Champagne, and it also highlighted a different balance. It opened up it paved the way for reconsidering the world balance before 18th, 19th century, where the Indian Ocean, what Bojars call Eurasian and African world systems before the 16th century, where the trading hub was actually not Europe, was not even the Mediterranean Sea, but was the Indian Ocean. So it allowed to question existing frames and hegemonies. Interestingly, then the very name of the Mediterranean Sea was used to develop history from uh, different centers, different perspectives. A very famous historian, Denis Lombard, who's been working on Indonesia, has written this beautiful article and sets of book called Another Mediterranean in Southeast Asia. And of course, we also come to this idea of connected history with a very famous historian, Sanjay Subramaniam. And we come to more recent work, like the Asiatic Mediterranean Sea, portuary cities, merchant networks in China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. So now the Mediterranean Sea is the Chinese Sea. We have books such as the one by Gun Goffrey, History Without Borders, The Making of an Asian World Region. So the study of the Indian Ocean has allowed to move from not only move away from a nationalist perspective, but also to move away from a Europe-centric perspective, and to restore the importance of Asia uh, in making the word history. So we move from a pre-European hegemony word to an Asian hegemony word somehow. And so we are now actually discussing new hegemonies. It's fairly obvious with notions such as the Silk Road, for instance, where the idea of the Silk Road referring to trading networks is actually being used for a political agenda. Um, and then come the questions when, since this notion of the pre-European Asia, pre-European world has become a very important one. Are we also talking about a pre-capitalistic world? And that's not so sure, because a very interesting recent notion is the extensions of notions which emerge from the study of medieval history of the Indian Ocean into the modern one, from the Lascar to the coolies and contemporary forced migration. The Hawala system still exists. The role of diaspora is still extremely important, and we are looking at transnational circulations, even of course during 18th, 19th, and 20th century. So it's more a reshaping maybe of history, where now European domination almost look a kind of an episode, and many see today's situation more as a kind of moving back to the pre-European domination, which of course is not as simple as that. Now, the first volume of Brodel was focused on the milieu, the very important aspect of the milieu. When he titled his set of 3 books, The Mediterranean Sea, it was not just to, well, um, kind of make sensations. His first volume deals actually with the milieu, ecosystem, ecotones, and there's certainly here um, an aspect of the Indian Ocean where scholarship still remains a little bit fragile. Most of the studies have been based on economic history, and the study of the ecosystem as well as material history is still fairly incomplete. And in that whole rewriting of history, which has really enabled to change our perspectives and maybe free ourselves from a Europe-centric perspective. We see new hegemonies, and we still have some missing actors. And the missing actors are the maritime communities, the shipbuilders, the sailors, and the techniques, which shows also that that idea, that agenda of transnational history remain actually restricted to certain communities, mainly trading diasporas. And there is here we are touching at a very important limitation of the academic word. We have in India an amazing collection of archival material by Lotika Varadarajan, who started a career as a very mainstream conventional historian working on the French East Indian Company in Surat, based on written records. And then from there, she started working on textile as well as maritime communities, and hence dealing with a totally different set of archival material, because the word of the mariners, of the shipbuilders, is particularly in Asia, is mainly an unwritten one, unrecorded one. If one goes to the shipyards of Bhuj, for instance, in Kutch in Gujarat, or nearby Chittagong, you can see still ships being built without any word being taught to the apprentice, and often also without any external power other than human power. So that word remains fairly and recorded. And it's very interesting to see that when Lotika Varadarajan started shifting towards exploring these maritime communities and this maritime world, she gradually was excluded from the academia, or at least the mainstream academia. Showing that there is still a very, very long way to go for really assessing the actual character of maritime history. And here I think we touch a very, very important and crucial element, because ships were till 19th century most probably the technological and maybe also the capital most important human production. I mean, of course, there were also temples and palaces, but let's say at least up to 15th, 16th centuries. They were for sure the technological most challenging human productions, because if you think of road transportation, it didn't evolve or change much till the 18th century, and the steam engine. A ship has, of course, to float. It has to move in different direction. It has to resist the pressure of the wind. It has to resist the pressure of the currents. It has to accommodate so many different cargoes. It can be a house, it can be a market, it can be actually a war a device. It can be sometimes it's almost a farm, a village. We know that ships which were sailing before the Europeans were actually bigger than European ships. So we have to rediscover a whole set of technology, which was not tool externalized technology, which was more an internalized one, and which also has a beautiful aesthetics. We have a little bit, as Nandita also mentioned, to consider that while making the difference between knowledge and informations, because as I mentioned, there was very, very little writing, or actually virtually no writing about shipbuildings, and very little about sailing. Sailing manuals, treaties were mainly written in Arabic or in Persian. So it was knowledge that had to be acquired from experience and observation. And that knowledge was actually highly adaptable, because when you study shipbuilding, you see that ships were constantly changing, adapting to the demand. And this whole set of information from which will come out the new technologies that we know comes from this knowledge, this pre-existent knowledge. And Lotika Varadarajan has written beautiful articles highlighting that actually Portuguese coming to India enrich considerably their astrological and astronomical knowledge. And actually European learned a lot from the navigation knowledge, not only in India, but from Arabs and from Africans through their coastal exploration, which lasted actually more than a century before reaching the coast of India. Of course, I mean, looking at shipbuilding is a way to challenge our notions about technology. Also, because when the world shifted actually to towards non-timber built ships, the reason to move towards steel ships was not that steel was actually superior. Far from that, it was because of scarcity of timber after the Napoleonic War. And here, again, we have another bridge towards ecological history and maritime history, which is forest management. So, but those first steel ships were built according to wooden ships and follow that pattern, and then later on evolve in its own pattern. So studying shipbuilding might be actually the key to really go deeper in the reassessment of world history through a different consideration of of technology, of knowledge, of ecology as well. The Ugly River, for instance, is still acknowledged as one of the most difficult one to travel. To reconsider how whole way of looking at hierarchies, because the bigger boats were not always the most efficient and the most cost effective, and ships of course had to adapt to the different waters they were sailing. And last, also to reconsider aesthetics, because again, we know very little about the canons of aesthetics in shipbuildings, and yet whenever we see boats, human-made boats, handmade boats, we are really strike. I mean, we are in awe most of the time by the beauty of the design and the way they combine so many different constraints into not only an efficiency but an amazingly aesthetic production.
Oh, sorry. I think I was muted. Yeah, thank you, Samuel. Thank you for the insightful presentation and also talking about the shifting frameworks in the historiography of the Indian Ocean studies itself. I will come to you later about with certain questions and all. Now I will request Tanya to go ahead with her presentation. Please, Tanya.
Mute me. Thank you. I'm going to say hello while I try and set up this. That was fascinating. Yes, we all suffer from sea blindness, so it was very interesting to hear more about seeing the sea more clearly. I'm a sculptor, that's my training, but I also write and draw, and more recently all my work has related to water one way or another. And even now when I look back on previous works, this is an example of more of a geological landscape that I made. I realized this model of a cliff, the sculpture of a cliff, is something that's been made by water. So I see water as the connecting element in the landscape, as well as the sculptor in the landscape. This is a work I made some time ago called Meadow, where I moved a wildflower meadow from Bath to London.
Sorry if I may interrupt, Tanya.
Yes?
Your screen is not shared with us.
Ah, excuse me. So I'm going to move back to this. Screen share.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Okay, fine.
Is that happening now? Oh.
You have zoomed the slide, yeah. Now it's fine.
I'm just going to change the view. Oh. Sorry. Positions. I can't see how to change my view now. Hold on.
And you just need to go into transitions.
Yes.
And go to, or go to slideshow, I think, and view it.
Apologies again. Our slideshow. Oops.
No, just.
No, that's worse. Hold on. I need to escape.
Just click on play from current slide.
There we go. Slideshow. Is that working?
Yes, this is fine.
Okay. Thank you. So this is an example of a sculpture that I made some time ago, which I now consider water having been one of the sort of sculpting elements to form this cliff top. This is a work I made where I transported a wildflower meadow via the inland waterway systems of the UK. So we have a canal system that is no longer part of our kind of communication system, but prior to the Industrial Revolution certainly was a really key way of transporting material. And this is a boat that was used to carry coal, but for the purposes of my work I worked with an agricultural college to grow a meadow that could be transported from the southwest of England to London. Other works that I've made include this work, Tree, which was to celebrate the Darwin bicentenary. Even though it's a work that uses a 200-year-old oak tree with this sort of 4mm slice right the way through the oak tree, I see the work almost as something that draws something that looks a bit like a river system. And just my observations of wood grain, where I became incredibly intimate with this tree, denote to me how liquid actually travelled through the tree and time passes through the tree as well. One of the works I made where I started to use water as a material in itself was this work for Jupiter Artland in Scotland. And I often make work that's site sensitive and responds to a particular place. So the work involved enlarging quite a small pond into a much larger body of water. And I built a boathouse. I've always really enjoyed the structures that sit between land and water. And inside this boathouse, I housed a river collection that I made from travelling around the UK. And I collected the water from 100 different rivers. So waters that wouldn't necessarily touch each other, there wouldn't be a point of confluence between them, were gathered within the structure. And you view the work while standing over water as well. The boathouse takes you out onto the lake. I then went on to make a kind of big sister work to rivers, which was called All the Seas. And this was a participatory work where, using social media and networks of communication, I invited people to send me water from all the world's seas. So a work that started about my relationship with the sea and why I think it's such a kind of precious resource and important thing to kind of consider culturally, became this sort of collection of other people's relationship with the sea. And I think about this work as well in relation to anthropological theories around gift culture as well, because people gifted the water to the project or to me, and then the work was then gifted back. So there's an interesting kind of exchange going on. And the form of the work became something like a library of the sea, or a kind of musical score of the sea as well. That's very something quite lyrical, even though obviously the work's silent. My other area of interest is the cross-disciplinary nature of drawing and the relationship between drawing and thinking, and how we visualize our thought through drawing. So I've made various publications on drawing, but this one, called Drawing Water, looks at drawing as a mechanism for exploration, with particular reference to the sea. So the drawings in here there's various kind of drawings by boat builders, by sailors, explorers, as well as marine biologists and artists, and how they visualize the sea. As well as having considered Charles Darwin and how theories of evolution impacted on how we see ourselves and our place in the natural world, I then went on to look at James Lovelock's theories, Gaia Theory, particularly in relation to the world's oceans. And these are 3 ocean bowls. Obviously, there's only one ocean, there's only one water. But I made these sculptures that depict the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. And they are made in steel that I poured salt water into, and they are corroding. I've also had residencies within various kind of environmental and ecological university departments, and I'm looking to unlock a drawing that somehow visualizes the challenge of climate change in the way Darwin's notebook and the Tree of Life drawing kind of embodies his theories of evolution. I'm looking to try and find visual representations of the challenges we face currently, and this is a drawing by Professor Tim Layton that looks at the feedback loop, which is perhaps the closest I've found so far to a visualization describing climate crisis. Coral bleaching has been the subject of some sculptural work that I've been developing, particularly looking at the kind of beauty of that underwater landscape, but making a kind of memorial to it. So I've presented coral reefs that have been bleached, so they are without colour, in dry aquarium. So kind of monuments or memorials to these environments. I also tried to draw the sea, the horizon line, the expanse of the sea in a number of different works that I call my sea marks, which just look at the mark of water, so the movement or energy contained in that vast surface of the sea. This is a mark that I've taken through to develop some public drinking water fountains that are trying to support movement to eliminate single-use plastic drinking water bottles. So these will be placed in a variety of public spaces that people can refill their bottles, trying to eliminate plastic. I think one of, as well as Charles Darwin and James Lovelock, I think the person that's probably had the most influence on my thinking is Rachel Carson, and her book, The Sea Around Us. She tells the stories of the sea very beautifully. She was a marine biologist, an activist, environmentalist, right at the start of the environmental movement. And I have drawn copies of her book that was first published in 1951. There are many, many editions, and I keep drawing these different editions. A form that I have found very potent for me to combine writing and drawing is working with newspapers and publishing with newspapers. The first time I did this was this publication called Dirty Water, that was telling the story of the River Thames, or telling aspects of the story of the River Thames. And I appointed the river the editor of this newspaper. So the river had a very strong editorial voice of this elderly female voice. And the newspaper was handed out to people crossing the river. 60,000 copies of it. There were 40 of us stationed at the bridge, cross bridges on the River Thames on a particular low tide. And there are many different kind of categories of information and draw visualizations of water. This is one from Tideway, who are putting in the new super sewer in London, as well as historical imagery. I've also made portraits of other rivers and bodies of water. This is a recent one of the River Tweed, which forms some of the course of this river forms the border between England and Scotland. So it's a contested water space. And these are publications, sometimes they're printed and typeset. This is one where I hand drew the text and made imagery within the publication. And the sculptures I made with this work were a set of divers that are cast in concrete using wetsuits, and so filling wetsuits with concrete to generate these sculptures. And I'm hoping to work with some marine biologists that are part of a coral reef restoration project to install these sculptures underwater eventually. Another recent newspaper publication was for the London Wetland Centre, where I spent a night in their bird hide, considering the fact that this wetland centre is directly beneath the flight path to Heathrow. So my publication looks at wetlands around the world and how important they are environmentally, and how sometimes they become contested spaces as well. And one of the wetlands I could directly refer it to was a research trip I made out to New Zealand to look at a particular area of wetland there that had been drained for the dairy industry, and the water's very heavily polluted. And it meant staying with a Maori community for a period of time and learning a whole kind of much more embodied relationship with landscape. And the kind of decolonisation project of New Zealand is exemplary. So it was a particularly fruitful trip for me. And meeting a particular river that has the same rights as a human. Marine activists have spent many years now gaining the same legal status for this river as you would have for any other ancestor in your family. So this was something that spoke to me very directly, because I feel all rivers do have a voice, and how as an artist you have platforms that might actually help that voice communicate with others is very motivating for me. So that's as much as I wanted to present.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks a lot for the fabulous presentation. Like all of your projects, like so interesting, so dense, and like also interconnected in many ways. And I think that's also very important for this project, to bring these diverse voices, which is also very invested in research, also attempting to kind of pioneer or kind of engender changes in the way we approach climate change, in the way we looked at history, in the way we looked at research, in the way we look at art practice itself. Thanks to all three of you. And I will have a few questions. I'll start with Nandita, basically, and which again we discussed even in our conversations also about the extensive research you are doing, Nandita. And like you have also remarked somewhere that it's like doing a PhD. There's so much of data, and data visualization itself is like part of the art and ecological practices right now. There's so much of research, there's so much of material. Would you like to talk about some interesting sources you have come across, something very pertinent to this particular project which you want to share?
I wanted to approach on like how rain is formed, and I found it whilst doing all this research about a whole notion. I mean, there are 2-3 concepts, okay? So I'm just going to talk about how interconnected the whole planet is, because water is something that crosses all boundaries. So one of the things which I found was like how actually Amazon rainforest gets nutrients. And that source was actually coming from, and it would carry around this dust right across from Africa to the Amazon. And the dust actually originates from this fish, which is fossilized fish from this old lake, and it carries around 800 million tons of dust. And while it's traveling across the ocean, it's feeding those planktons, and it's basically then going and fertilizing the Amazon forest. Now, what gets further interesting is that when all of this is being fertilized and there is sun coming in the ocean, the planktons start multiplying. And then there is a feeding frenzy that starts taking place, and the zooplanktons come and start eating these planktons. And what starts happening is there is something called DMST, which is in the cell of these planktons, or they're also known as microalgae. And that tears the cell, and it sort of produces, it leads it to release this DMS. And DMS interacts with all the bacteria on the ocean, which becomes a sticky substance. Why I'm talking about it is because this is what connects, the microalgae connects to the DMS with water. So there's a bonding that takes place. And when the waves form, it gets pushed up into the air, and the water droplets carry these microalgae and bacteria into the sky, and it starts creating clouds. The bacteria has this ice nucleating substance. And so rain is actually a formation of all that microalgae. To, even if you go through the Amazon forest, the dust, the pollens, all that information which is dispersed in the plants. And the more the varied kind of plants, the better the cloud formation. So the cloud actually mediates the temperature on the planet. So they act as a thermoregulator in some form, and that's how rain takes place. So when you clear cut forests, you're actually clear cutting the rain. So that's one story which I found really, really fascinating, and it's known as bioprecipitation.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I can go for many more stories in this, because there are lots of, like, what was a fascinating subject. But
we will have another session. Yeah. Samuel, what was really striking in your presentation is this statement which you had made, which I find very original and also argumentative, is that how is this repository, or also the practice of boat making in India and also in South Asia, would lead us to understand, or lead us to a different understanding of the cultural landscape of monsoons. Would you like to elaborate on that? What do you?
Yes, thank you, Premjish. Obviously, since it is based on observations and on experience, it's the absolute anti-Anthropocene practices, the one which is really rooted in an environment, though of course in a moving environment when it comes to sailors and shipbuilding. So it really informs us about how the whole knowledge we built up gradually over centuries has been formed. And it's very interesting because when you start really engaging with shipbuilding, you really have to break away from all the categories. For instance, these ideas of, as I mentioned, that steel boats, steam engines and all that would belong to a certain period. They would be more evolved and more cost effective than the previous one. Not and only it is not, certain at all. It depends what are the criteria. But also the ships, as we can see in India and some other parts in the Indian Ocean, are still being built. This knowledge is still here and it cohabits. And actually, it's a kind of a parallel economy and knowledge which still runs and which has been just marginalized. But which is still there. And it's very interesting in the time of climate changes. how actually the course comes back to the fore, and how this knowledge proves to be extremely useful, and to observe if the Anthropocene word which we have set in motions is being confronted to the delta, the ever moving landscape. And that's particularly true with the delta of Bengal, where the landscape is absolutely changing all the time. Rivers and even the land, islands coming up or sinking, as well as how it defies our category. What is the sea? What is a river in a delta? What is the blue water? What is the salted water? It depends about the time of the day, about the season, about so many factors which are beyond our control. That knowledge of those people, of the ship builders, the sailors, who have been confronted for centuries, and of course it's a transmission which goes across different communities, but how this knowledge proves to be extremely relevant today, and how little it is being actually informed, documented, researched. It is and how it is how it can allow us, and how actually it requires us to totally renew, start afresh the way we look at knowledge.
Thank you, Samuel. Very, very interesting. Tanya, I'm very lucky. I have a copy of The Dirty Water with me, thanks to Linika. And the moment we went through it, we said we want Tanya to be part of this exhibition, and maybe we will ask her to recreate another story, maybe related to one of those backwaters in Kochi.
The backwaters of Kerala, yes.
Yeah, that was, but also like in Kerala's context, like as we also discussed, its history of publications and numerous, the proliferation of Kerala's publication history also. But when I look at this particular project about the Thames River, you gave the river an agency, a character, a soul to this particular river. It's very fascinating, very effective. How did you arrive at that?
I suppose I feel all waters have a voice somewhere. I think different rivers speak differently, and I'm often kind of led with my work, so led by my subject somehow. And the river is the River Thames is so kind of central to the story of London, the story of Britain, the story of the British Empire. It was the river that brought wealth to the city. It's why there's the shipping industry's relationship to the city of London meant that there was a financial industry, the insurance industry. I mean, there's so many layers to that, yet alone the kind of cultural references and how the river kind of dictates to the city. But because our connection with the sea has become much more remote, our connection with shipping has become much more remote, particularly since containerization, it's become an industry without people. It all happens out of cities now, at kind of much bigger, deeper ports. Our relationship with how we understand how so much of the world's stuff moves still via the seas and oceans and comes into cities through water communication. We're just very disconnected from that. So I wanted to somehow kind of reanimate connection, and that meant kind of how do I tell stories? Well, I need a storyteller, and trying to ask the river to be the storyteller rather than me be the storyteller, and it allowed for kind of multiple episodes through history. I mean, it's not a kind of sequential chronology. things happen in a very kind of random order of time. It's more to do with the rising tide or the ebbing tide. That's the beat or the rhythm, and the highs and lows of the river as well. So moments of great triumph or beauty on the river compared to moments that are deeply tragic or things to be ashamed of, which include the state of the water. You know, the Thames is horrifically polluted. Every time there's flooding, heavy rains in the city, the drain system mixes with the sewage system straight into the river. So that's happening several times a month, hence the need for a whole new kind of infrastructure and engineering under the city at the moment, which is going on to clean up the river, that will hopefully last and support the city's population for some, you know, maybe 100 years to come. So there were so many bits of information that the format of a newspaper it works because you don't have to write the PhD. You can kind of introduce a story. You can use images to help you move through a story as well, and hopefully you find a kind of sympathy with the editor. And I would love to find the voice of the waters of Kerala. I mean, it's also, I mean, I think just even thinking about the monsoon and the idea of the global monsoon and how the monsoon is not an event in one place. It's an energy of water that moves through the globe, and it's part of the world's rhythm. And how to connect that possibly to very kind of particular local, you know, knowledge that has existed for so long in a place, and be sensitive to how those stories are told is quite a challenge you've set.
Thank you, Tanya. If anyone want to ask question from the audience, please feel free. You can send a message.
Premjish, Shefali has a question.
Yeah.
It says, how may this exchange go forward and manifest? A repository of the history and ecology and economy of water.
Yes, I'll answer that. But before that, Samuel, you have a question. Are there any records from Sri Lanka or Ceylon or Serendip, as it may have been called in older times? We had the Portuguese, Dutch, and British who colonized us for years with a maritime and mercantile interest for spices, coconut, rubber, and tea.
Yeah, sure. So I remember in a private chat, there are many because, I mean, Kerala and Sri Lanka was the compulsory stopover for those who wanted to travel, let's say, from either Eastern Africa or the Arabian Sea towards Southeast Asia or even towards China. Of course, it was a stopover in itself. For its various products, so there are a lot of sources in or references in Arabic languages, in Southeast Asian languages, as well as in some South Indian languages, and not only South Indians but Tamil epigraphy. So there are a lot of references on Sri Lanka, Serendip, and Serendip in itself being an Arabic word, so it shows that there were references when the Arabs became really the movers of the Indian Ocean trade by the 9th century. That's why we have so many languages which were adapted to the Arabic script, including Malayalam, for instance, and Tamil and Hebrew and so many other languages. And that's the beautiful story, and we are talking about transnationalism. And so, since Arabic did not always have the necessary signs to reproduce the sounds of those languages, new signs were added to each of those Arabic transcription of those languages.
Thank you, Samuel. If there's any other question, please feel free to type it out. And there's a question for Nandita from Sarah Ahmed. Who is supporting the digitization of your art? It's amazing work and very interactive, but it must have a development cost.
Totally. I mean, the world runs on money. You can't escape capitalism at all. So, I mean, it's been a struggle. I have sort of over a period of time collected production money. But coming from a filmmaking background also, learned how to work with multiple people. And some people sort of pitch in their skill level because they believe in the project at a subsidized rate. That's one way. The other aspects is I've been funded specifically for the app project, which was Osmoscape by Indian Foundation for the Arts. So they have partially funded that program, but this is the first time I've actually got a grant because I have a dual citizenship. So I sort of fall between the cracks in terms of funding and grants. And the third thing was I moved to Goa, which is like a peri-urban society, to cut on certain costs. So I live in a village and I research here. And when I need to produce a work, like a physical production, I'm going to the cities like Bombay or Delhi. But most of my research is happening with students and scientists and researchers across the internet. And I've built this entire net in different aspects. So that's how I'm able to manifest such complex projects.
Thank you, Nandita. And there's a student who had sent a message, and this is for Nandita again. Sorry, this is for Tanya. If she can talk more about book and reproduction of the cover, it is very interesting. If she can share some more insight.
Do you mean this?
Yeah, the other ones also, which she had shared, Rachel Carson's books and I think this is called the book covers. I think that's what he means.
Drawing books.
Yeah.
I think I possibly draw books even more than I read books, but there's something about studying them that closely to actually look for signs of usage with the book, how they've been handled. I think of books as worlds in their own. And the journey, the sort of traveling you do when you enter a book. Well, obviously it's as close to travel as I've got recently as well. But there's something about also my personal frustration as an artist. I've never been able to draw landscape, or not necessarily sure I would ever want to draw landscape particularly, because my experience of landscape is an unbound experience. It's not something you frame and put limits on. But I do draw the books that are my guides to landscape. And The Sea Around Us by Rachel Carson is perhaps my most useful guidebook to the sea. And she talks a lot in the book about what's going on in the depths of the sea, because obviously we normally only just see it's this vast surface, and that you don't necessarily see the complexity of activity going on, the interconnectedness of the sea, the relationship between the sea and the land. And she also speaks very beautifully about what we don't know. And as a science, she's a scientist, but many scientists don't like to talk about what they don't know. And she speaks about the unknowns in a very beautiful way. I mean, she's as much a poet as a scientist. So, and how the sea still has much that we don't understand about it, and that's another reason why not only have I reread the book, but I might actually just stare at the book and draw the book itself.
Thank you, Tanya. Shefali had asked, and I think I would answer this: how may this exchange go forward and manifest a repository of the history and ecology and economy of water? It's curatorially, it's an ambitious task. It's also a daunting task to bring together all these diverse voices, not only of experts, but also of stakeholders and the community. It's very important to bring together community and also policymakers, activists, and all together. scientists and all of them together. And I think that's where collaborations are, again, very important. Collaborations at the level of institutions is very important. And I'm very thankful for Institute France and many other organizations who have come forward and like they're supporting this initiative. And Institute France has always been at the forefront of like being there, whether it's Bertrand, whether it's Alice, Shefali, Leah, Pritha, all those people like who have always been there for me, helpful towards me and all. I'm really thankful to you guys. And thanks again for co-hosting this particular event too. But institutional collaboration is something which we are looking forward. And the collaboration has also now extended to a particular research platform called Monsoon Assemblages, and which is again one of the foremost research, repositories on monsoon and design practices, which is kind of adaptable for monsoon and is based in UK. And they are doing commendable research on South Asian monsoon. So we are collaborating with them, and there are so many interesting organizations. This interdisciplinary art organization called COAL, C-O-A-L from France, and artistic collaborations like all of you are here. And again, not only limiting to artistic collaborations, but again, bringing together poets, writers, activists, and people from diverse backgrounds to come together and think about this particular phenomenon, and scholarly interventions, which are also required. So I'm not seeing this coming together, that it will only manifest as an exhibition, but I see various byproducts which will come out of this. There will be a series of publications, there would be a web series, there will be exhibitions, there will be a syllabus itself, which can be used to teach monsoon, and which can be kind of used everywhere in the world, which will have a multidisciplinary approach to look at monsoon and climate change. That will happen. We're also looking to, once the COVID and the lockdown and all this crisis is over, to issue research fellowships for young researchers who can do research on monsoon. And that will again feed into the research archive and the repository of this particular project. We are planning to take out community film screenings. So we don't want to be mobile and like do it at one place. We want to move around and kind of screen films and documentaries on that. So there is a lot of collaboration which is required, but this is not an exhibition. Exhibition is part of that. We are looking for various, as I said, various outreach and outlets. So that's what I want to answer to you. Thank you, Shefali. And there is this question by Karni Singh Bhara. He has asked asked all of you, there is so much of nationalism and emotion around land and fatherland and motherland. Do you foresee a time when water could replace this? Very, very interesting question. Anyone would like to take that?
Well, I might bring maybe how to say a kind of a note which is not such an optimistic, because water is being increasingly invested by nationalist feelings as well in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific Ocean for strategic interests, very obviously. And so we've seen a lot of disputes around territorial seas. It's as we know, China is claiming a lot of different seas, and a lot of disputes in Southeast Asia around islands as well. The sea is being turned into a territorial bit according to the idea of the land rather than the other way around. But well, let's see. We can always hope, of course, that the monsoon will change that, will reverse that flow.
Yeah. So it's very important also because when Samuel was talking, I was thinking about the Silk Road project of the China government.
Yes.
So the Project Monsoon, which is launched, Project Monsoon or Project Monsoon, which is launched by the Indian government, and how modern governments are appropriating ancient, imaginary, or like ancient trade routes. and kind of appropriating them to kind of dispense and like kind of highlight or foreground a cultural superiority. Again,
and yeah, sorry.
No, I'm saying like how these seasonal phenomena, trade routes, and all are appropriated in order to build new bilateral relations, geopolitical dominance, and all that. So there's a lot going on, even in the name of oceans, even in the name of weather, even in the name of seasonal phenomena and all. And the challenge would also be to kind of be free from all this, to claim water, to claim an ocean, or to develop an oceanic perspective, and be free from all these rigidities of nationalism, boundaries, and all that. I think water is a wonderful metaphor, beautiful metaphor. The amorphous nature of water, the free-flowing nature of water is a beautiful metaphor for us to adapt to. That's what I think.
And just a last note, sorry, the very idea of the Silk Road is a contradiction in itself. There was absolutely no road. It gives it's very part of the Anthropocene project, a kind of a door-to-door moving to one point, from one point to another. While most of the time we had to deal with multiple intermediaries, multiple and changing negotiations. When it comes to the Northern Bay of Bengal, there were absolutely no roads because rivers were changing all the time, and so was land actually changing. So it's one of the first ideas we have to free ourselves from is the very idea of the road, actually.
Yeah, that is true. Very true. So any other question? Is there any other remarks you want to make, Tanya, Nandita? Tanya, please.
Yes, I suppose just to add to that question about water in the geopolitical landscape, we haven't talked about flooding, we haven't talked about desertification, you know, the presence of too much water, the presence of no water, and how that's changing kind of migration issues around the globe as well. You know, and there are kind of ecologies that depend on flooding, and then there are places that are regularly overwhelmed and can't cope. So I suppose you know, most of my thinking about water is yes, about connectivity and flow and interconnection. But there is a kind of catastrophe narrative as well, that our climate crisis is polarizing. And I suppose that will come into the conversation about monsoon and political borders that flooding doesn't respect, or desertification doesn't respect.
Nandita, you want to say something?
I would say more like, you know, it's definitely optimistic, but right now I don't see it in the next 100 years that we can go beyond the politics. And therefore, it's, we particularly every country, if right now we are in the paradigm of these borders, to document our environmental data. Because till we don't have data, we can't justify policy. And basically, we will not understand and study the intrinsic, deep, interconnected aspects how water travels through this planet. And they both have to go hand in hand in terms of an educational process as well as data sharing, because that is what is going to drive how we are going to be sharing water, which is now going to be considered the next blue gold. Earlier it was petroleum, black gold, and now it's going to be water. And we just... it is a right. We are biological entities that need to survive. And because we have polluting technologies, more and more of our drinking water is reducing. And we're not able to tap into the ocean to get that. So personally, a lot of R&D, that's what I would say, to bring about this utopic vision.
Thank you, Nandita. Is there any more questions? Is there anybody else who want to ask?
No, Prem, I just wanted to extend a word of thanks to everybody. Thank you, Tanya. You know, it's a difficult time. Samuel, thank you for being on board for the entire series. We close this series on this session now. Creation versus collapse. Helen has actually stepped out to attend another webinar. Thank you, Premjish, for presenting A Tale of Monsoons. And We worked very hard on it before COVID happened, and we know exactly how hard we were crawling on all fours. Thank you, Nandita, for sharing the concepts, the data. They're fabulous, and I think the going forward, although Premjish has explained it, will be considered, and it will be partly digital to begin with, and then the physicality of the project can manifest over a period of time, right? As things open up. So thank you, everybody. It's a long session, and thank you for holding up with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Tanya.
Good night.
Thanks everyone for
everybody.
joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shefali, and thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.